Welcome everybody to Faith Vicinanza's Studio and Gallery today for our roundtable discussion on processing Holocaust trauma through the arts. I just want to give you a little bit of background on where this all comes from. We really need to rebrand it. Southbury says no to the Nazis. The conversation continues. And where this comes from is Ed Edelson, former first selectman of Southbury and neighbor here in Heritage Village, had a commemorative event to recognize the 1937 pond, which memorialized that time in 1937 when Southbury residents refused to allow the German-American Bund to build a military camp in town. It's a great story that Ed made sure was memorialized and is actually part of the Region 15 curriculum. So Ed is an example of what it means to have an idea, follow through, and make it happen for the people in your community. And when we were at the commemoration, I read a poem that Bernie Kaplan accompanied me with, and just a wonderful experience and a beautiful moment for everybody involved. But Ed left us with a challenge that I took as a homework assignment. And that was, how do we keep this conversation going? And it occurred to me that I know some really incredible authors, composers, community activists, and researchers and thinkers who could be a part of a conversation about what it means to push through Holocaust trauma through the arts, specifically in this case through the written word, right? And so I asked the people I know if they'd come around this table, and nobody said no. Everybody said yes immediately. So this is how this came about, in large part because Ed gave me homework. Very, very grateful to have leadership in this community of this caliber that makes things happen. And grateful to Faith for the use of this studio to host this event, and grateful to everybody for taking the time and effort to be here on this beautiful first full day of spring. So thank you very, very much.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Yeah.
Please turn your phones off or turn them to silence.
So we'll do a brief introductions. My name is Lee Carlson. I was Woodbury Poet Laureate when I lived in town, and now I'm a Southburian living here in the village. My husband and I manage Orenaug Mountain Publishing, and we just come up with fun things to do with our neighbors. So that's me. We'll go this way. Deb?
Do I press any buttons?
You're good.
I'm Deb Holman. I live in Woodbury. Come a little closer. Oh, a little closer. You can hear me. I don't know if you can see me. I'll stand up. It really doesn't make any difference. But I've been doing family genealogy for nearly 2 decades, and I concentrate on sharing family stories through writing.
Shabbat Shalom, Rabbi Polokoff, the rabbi here in Southbury for many decades now. And I see a number of folks associated with our synagogue. It's great to see everyone here today. And what an appropriate topic, actually, for a day like today. So thank you so much for having me and for doing this topic.
So I'm Ed Edelson, and I feel a little guilty because I really came up with that because of what Rabbi Eric said, I'd say a month before the commemoration, when the question was, how do you avoid stories like what happened in Southbury or the Warsaw Ghetto from being forgotten? And what Rabbi said was, well, that's why you have rituals. That's why you have traditions. But you have to start those traditions. So I'm hoping we're all working together towards creating something on an annual basis that will help to remind people of what brave people did before us. So I'm very glad to be here today. Thank you.
Ed.
Should I go?
We use this microphone now, right, Ed?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Helene Stapinski. I'm a writer. I did a story about Bonnie's grandfather escaping from Nazi Germany for the New York Times, and we became friends. And so we wound up writing a book together about it. He was saved by many people, but his financial sponsor to come over to America was the publisher of Superman comics. He was a Jewish man. And he saved a bunch of people, including all of her family. Anyway, so she wouldn't be here without him. And so we wrote a book together about that. But since then, I have found out that my family is Jewish. So I was raised Catholic, and I went back to Poland, and I got to talk to you about this after. So it's a long story, but I think that's the next book, and I'm convinced we're related. So here you go.
I'm German and you're Polish. Oh, well, anyway.
No, they're originally
Oh, you're right, you're right.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Bonnie Siegler. The book is called The American Way, A True Story of Nazi Escape, Superman, and Marilyn Monroe. And I swear it all makes sense if you read the book. But it also weirdly is a little bit, it's a Holocaust story, but it's also a little uplifting, if that's possible to say. So I'm sure we're going to get into it a little more.
Yeah.
I'm Bernie Kaplan. I was the, at one point in my life, I was the only Jewish dairy farmer in New England.
Wow.
That's the sideline. My father was in the Polish army when Hitler attacked. So I knew about the Holocaust from a very early age. Most of his family was killed. Some of his brothers and sisters had escaped. That's a whole other story. Amazing stories, amazing stories. I became a teacher, an English teacher. Before that, I was a folk singer and then in a rock and roll band for many years before I became a teacher. And then I became an administrator and a principal of a very good high school for many, many years. And I met Roger Ames, and that's a whole story in itself. But he asked me to write the libretto for an oratorio that he was commissioned to do. And I said, no, I'm not doing it because I didn't want to go there. And then he came back a week later and said, if you did do it, how would you do it? So I said, well, Roger, anti-Semitism goes way back in history, and certainly way back in Europe, as does the roots of European Jewry. So I would start without lyrics and just write a melody that somehow captured the roots and the soul of the Jewish people in Europe. And he came back a week later with this haunting, unbelievable melody that did exactly that. And that's where the story began.
Well, thanks everybody for your introductions. We have an incredible group here. And we have an incredible logistical challenge with microphones, but we will be passing these around so that you all can hear us. And our friends who are on the live stream, please, this is our maiden voyage with this. Our goal is to make this conversation available to as many people as possible, including people who couldn't get physically to the studio, and to memorialize it as a video that will be available after the fact. So all new ground for us, but we're going to get there. And I want to just say too, I am a lapsed Methodist, exactly 2 bake sales short of eternal salvation. I am doomed. I am doomed. So I do not have a personal connection to this beyond the fact that I am a human being on earth. And when I thought of the people I know who have been directly impacted by the Holocaust, and they are my neighbors and friends and family, this is an American conversation, and this is a story for all of us. So how we process the Holocaust and how we consider how these people have written about this experience and have chosen to push through all that is involved in taking a personal story and making it accessible to a broader audience is really worth thinking about, and where we are today. So on this beautiful sunny first day of spring, my first big question is, you guys all chose to do something really difficult in not only capturing the story, but in making it available to others. And could we get your thoughts on what kicked that off for you? What made you know this was a story that needed a public debut, that needed to be heard and read and thought about? What made you go there and take all those risks?
I can easily
Turn it on.
Oh.
It's off again.
When Trump was elected,
The first time.
in 2016, and nobody was talking about the Holocaust. Nobody was talking about Germany in 1933. Nobody was talking about how this starts. And it made me insane. And so I decided I had a Holocaust story to tell, and this was the moment. I needed to get a story about the Holocaust in the New York Times. They needed to start talking about it. And I had this come on, if you will, which was this footage of Marilyn Monroe that my grandfather had shot. So I found Helene, and she wrote the article for the Times, and it went viral. And it was just, it was a way, I used what I had to get the Holocaust in the New York Times. That was my whole goal. I didn't know what else I could personally do in my life. And so that was it. I told my own story. And then the book came a few years later. Anyone else?
So my story, I really had no intention of writing a book. I had been doing a lot of family research over the years, and then in about 2007, I found out about reparations from Austria that would really be helpful. My mom, who suffered from a variety of illnesses at that point, and all she wanted to do was stay in her own house and didn't have the funds for it. So I thought, well, I'll try applying for the reparations and maybe that will help. It took years, but it did. I did accomplish that. But in the process of the research I needed to do for the reparations claim, I came across so much information about my family that had never been shared. So, like many, many of that same generation, all I knew was that my grandfather had been in a concentration camp, 2 actually, and that my family, my mother's paternal family, lost everything when they fled Vienna in 1938, 39. And so I was just putting it together as a family story. But the more I worked on it, the more I realized, because it was really a story of what happened in the early years, that a lot of people had no idea what was happening in 1938 and 1939. It was very, very different than the atrocities later on, but it was still terrible for everybody who was living at the time. And I just wanted to, there's so many Holocaust stories out there. And my family, they were not heroes. They didn't hide people in attics or, fight in a revolution or, whatever, resistance. But I wanted to tell the story of what it was like for ordinary people living through extraordinary times. And so I finally did. And the story is called Nothing Really Bad Will Happen, which sounds like a terrible story, a terrible title for a Holocaust story. But that is in fact what my great-grandfather said. This happens to Jews all the time. This is going to pass. And, many people ask, why didn't people leave? Well, one of the reasons, I think we're going to talk about it later, is that the history itself is, we've been through this before, we're going to get through it again, and we all know what happened.
So I'm the panelist who was very generously included, even though I'm the one without the book or the artistic work. My approach actually, I think, would be slightly different, and in part, I think in terms of the work that I've done and others, Ed and I have done regarding Southbury's story with the German-American Bund. But what sort of suffuses it all is, I think, the sense I have, and I believe the sense that many of the people have who come into our building on our campus, come into the synagogue, the Federation, which is that the Holocaust is not ancient history. The Holocaust is part of our continued lived daily experience. We have numerous people within our community who are the children or grandchildren of survivors. The effects of the Holocaust continue to reverberate in our consciousness. So I really don't think that it's completely gone, and I think because of that, it's natural that we are focused on it. And I think when I look at sort of the Southbury story or some of the stories which we're going to hear about today, it's so critical that as we look at it, not to be that as we look at the Holocaust, where we can find those stories of inspiration that we can hold on to, which is not the entirety, as we know, of the Holocaust. There's lots of tragedy within the Holocaust, but those stories which can help us to identify which ways in which we can be impactful, I think is particularly necessary. So.
Well, I don't want to argue with Rabbi Eric, but I think the film that we put out has probably been seen by more people than read books these days. So I think you helped to author that, and you're, if not the star, well, you're my star in that movie. Well, Lillian Wentworth is bigger star, but anyway.
Hey, Ed,
So-
would you just let everybody know what that movie is?
So we worked together in 2011. We sort of had a pact between Eric, myself, and a congregational minister, Shannon Wall, that we were going to create a documentary about what happened in Southbury in 1937. And our main objective, correct me if I'm wrong, was capture oral history about our town before it was too late. And our audience were the people of Southbury, small town of about 20,000 people. I don't think we ever thought anybody outside of this town would ever see it. And it has gone way beyond that. And we have done numerous webinars together to inform more people. And kind of like what Deb said, so many people did not know what had happened here in the United States. They might say they know what's happened in Germany, but they have little knowledge of the 30s, especially back in 2011. Been a lot more scholarship, I'd say, in the last decade about what happened in the 1930s, just in the last 4 or 5 years. So I think what you did with that film and what you contributed, you know, with the way you speak and the way you convey information is really immeasurable. I mean, it's really phenomenal the way I see audiences everywhere I show it, how they react to that. So kudos to you. But my story, which is Lois's story, was a lot more prosaic. Because of what we did with the film, we brought it to the attention of the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum in D.C., which confirmed that they'd never heard anything about what happened in Southbury. And then they quickly reminded us the Holocaust happened in Europe. So why would they care about what happened in the town of Southbury? So that was dispiriting. But we soon learned that they were going to have an exhibit that would talk about that whole period of time from 1933 through the end of World War II, and maybe the Southbury story would fit into that. Well then, and that was good news, except they then said it'll take at least 5 years before we put that together. So for that period of time, I'd say from 2013 to 2018, we did very little to promote the story. Everybody got busy with their lives. But then the grand opening happened in April of 2018. And I went there with Christine, my wife, and we met Rebecca Erbelding, who was one of the curators. And this was the first time I had a chance to talk to somebody outside of Southbury and got the confirmation that what our people in this town did was unique. We always believed that, but we really were never sure of it. And if you watch the movie, we're always a little caveat here, a little caveat there. And the second thing was that she said in putting the exhibit together, Southbury was the turning point from when people in the United States went from saying, well, this is a European problem, it's not a US problem, to recognizing this could be a US problem. And as a result, they gave us a lot of real estate in this exhibit, much more than any other story that I recall, having its own room, its own area. Really impressive. And that's how I got to talk to Rebecca about that. Well, as you leave a museum, I think most of you know, you got to make it through the gift shop. And quite honestly, we were looking for books for our grandchildren. And that's when it hit me that although our movie, which I thought highly of, was really, it was an adult oriented. But I felt there are really good lessons in here for younger people. Many of my grandchildren at that time were about age 10, fourth grade. And that's when it struck. And I said, someone's got to write a book for children about this story. And I'll just go on from there. I quickly realized I had no knowledge of how to write a book. especially for children. And so I spent at least a year trying to pitch this to other people. And I got nowhere. And one morning I woke up and I went to my computer and I started writing. And that became the basis of Lois's story. And there are a lot of people here, well, maybe a few people here, who helped me along the way. Obviously, Christine was very helpful. She'd actually written a children's book, so she had a leg up on me. Barbara Meckler gave me a lot of good comments. My sister over in Israel, she gave me a lot of very helpful thoughts. Rich Boritz, I don't think Rich is here today. He's not feeling well, but it was a team effort, and everybody helped me do something that I probably wasn't qualified to do. But sometimes, you know, you just got to do what you got to do.
Thanks, Ed.
I'm gonna talk about the new thing.
Oh, sure.
So, there was a rumor in our family that we were Jewish. It was a rumor. It was just, you know, no one wanted to talk about it. I tried to get one of my aunts to talk about it about 30 years ago, and she said, "Don't you dare write about that. Don't you dare." So I was young at the time, fairly young, and I kind of put it in my back pocket and went on to write other things. And then working with Bonnie, took that deep dive into the Holocaust, which I had never done before. I thought I knew about the Holocaust, but I knew nothing, and spent 2 years, you know, researching it. And it became more imperative that I find out what our story was, you know. And it turns out one of my cousins, who's 89, who lives in Poland, wasn't doing so great, and it was now or never, you know. She's the last one of that family, and her grandfather was Jewish, and that's my great grandfather. And so I just bought a plane ticket and went and spent 5 weeks in Poland and researched the family and found out incredible stories. So, and this family still doesn't want to talk about it here. You know, it took me 4 visits to my older cousin to get her to talk to me, and she finally did talk to me about it. And I did, you know, archival research and found stuff. And now I've found out who was murdered and where they were buried and things like that. But they still don't want to talk about it. I've made 2 appointments, or not appointments, but 2 plans to visit that same aunt who didn't want to talk to me, and she's canceled twice. So I'm still mid-project. So
Here you go. I think it's on.
yeah, it's on.
There's 2 things, 2 truths. One is that the Nazis were successful. They wiped out European Jewry. The final solution was mostly pretty final. The statistics are beyond belief. I mean, that's one truth. And the second truth is that there was a new kind of anti-Semitism that arose that gave cause to the Holocaust and gives cause to other Holocausts. And that is that if you were a Jew, you could not be a Jew. In other programs and other anti-Semitic attacks all through history, if you were a Jew but you agreed to be a Christian, you were okay, they'd leave you alone. Maybe you could hide your Jewishness, but if you go to church or put up a cross, you'd be okay. This was different. If you were a Jew, your blood was poisoned. It's a new kind of virulent hate that made it impossible to be a human being and be a Jew. And thirdly, the thing that I think is the most compelling is the expression, the cry that came out loud and clear across the world was never again. Never again, everybody else. Never again. And look where we are. Instead, it's again and again and again.
And just to build on what you're saying there, Bernie, the kind of the discredited science of eugenics, which, you know, took hold in our country. A lot of Hitler's whole ideas had their roots here.
Yeah, Hitler quoted.
Yeah.
He said that the U.S. was way ahead.
Yes.
Hitler and the Nazis quoted America. They said they found their way because of the United States and racism against the blacks. They were big students of that.
Yeah, they're following Jim Crow. I mean, Jim Crow is the rule book.
Yeah.
So when we talk about, is this an American problem, we are the progenitors of that problem.
Yeah, I just would underscore two things that Bernie said. First is that the Jewish people still haven't demographically recovered from the Holocaust. So that if you look at our numbers are less now than they were in the late 1930s. So,
You mean worldwide?
Worldwide, the worldwide demographics of Jewry. So, absolutely. The other thing is that as we use the term racist, and we apply it primarily to African Americans now and other peoples of color, if you go back to the 1930s, it wasn't until after World War II that that term changed. The word racist was used in terms of being racist against Jewry. Absolutely.
And a lot of that language has crept back into the political discourse, and not even crept, it's come barging through the door when our leaders talk about people having good genes. And in the science of having children now, where people are selecting their eggs based on what they think the outcome of the fertilization process will be to have the just right child. It's just kind of been normalized, but it does creep into the news cycle, this idea that there are better genes than other genes. It's that absurdity that goes unchallenged and becomes part of the discourse. And nevertheless, that whole, I want to just kind of turn to the denial question that I had about your grandfather, right? Great-grandfather, and this idea that nothing really bad will happen here. And something that comes through in both The American Way and in Deb's book, Nothing Really Bad Will Happen, is this idea that if you are a productive, contributing, hardworking member of society, that will free you from the punishment that comes with those people who are all concerned about these so-called bad genes. Can you just speak to that denial and how that it might be a coping mechanism, or how you saw that in your research and your understanding of your family's history?
Well, I think we all have experienced the benefits of denial, across the board. And I think what it came to from my great grandfather, at least, was he was basing his denial on his past experiences and centuries of Jewish experience. But it was also, like Sandy said, you can't take my business from me. I worked an entire lifetime for this, and just because I'm Jewish, I'm going to lose everything. So, there was an undercurrent of anger, of course. So my great-grandfather barely got out of Austria. He and his wife, my great-grandmother, got out on the last ship that left Portugal, in 1942. So they were pretty darn lucky. And I think the denial for him, the other side of it is hope. If you recognize what, horrible things are happening, then you're going to start losing hope. And once you lose hope, that's it. There's no reason to get up the next day. So, my great-grandfather, from what I've experienced and, in my research and what little my mom had told me, because I'd never met him. Actually, I think I did meet him when I was 3, maybe. He was not a pleasant man at all. And I was kind of writing this story about this man who had dedicated his entire adult life, and my grandfather as well, to trying to get back what they lost. And he really had no life because of that. That's all he did. He, pushed aside family in favor of trying to get back the business. And I think it really comes down to hope. He needed to keep that hope going, that something was going to, turn. And I remember reading one of the letters that he had written to his lawyer back in Vienna. And I have, God bless my family, they saved everything. So I have all of these wonderful letters. And kind of lost my train of thought there, but in the letter, my great-grandfather said to his lawyer, I think they're waiting till we all die so that they don't have to pay. And it certainly, looked like that for, I mean, he didn't know. He died decades before we got reparations. But I think, you want to keep the hope, so you deny what's really happening in front of you.
Yeah, my grandparents, my grandparents, when they found out they could get coded in New York, would go to America. They tried to convince my grandmother's parents, my great grandparents, and it wasn't so much. It was more, it won't happen to us. It might happen to those other Jews, but not us. So they really felt like they were safe. And even though they weren't even 60 years old, they were too old to move, too old to give up their life, and they were murdered. The one thing I will say about writing, the horror of learning information like that, but also I didn't know my great-grandparents like you. I got to know them a little by doing this research. I kind of got to hang out with them, if you will. Even it was just like they were not just words on a page anymore. They were human beings. Even though I knew their end more than their beginning, it was still really intense and moving and helpful for me. That now they're humans, they're real people.
Bonnie, on that note, your maternal grandparents, right?
Yes.
Albert and Martha?
Those are the great-grandparents.
Great-grandparents.
Yes.
I keep skipping a generation around here, right?
The main character, Jules, is the grandfather.
Got it. So the Friedmans essentially disappeared, right? He was arrested, and then your great-grandmother went to go find him?
Yeah, he was going to buy bread one morning, and they accused him of stealing, which of course he hadn't, but it was just anything they could do. So they took him to the police station, and my great-grandmother found out and said, oh my God, I have to go get him out. So she went there and they arrested her too. And then it was just a series of trains before they got to Minsk, outside of Minsk, where the soldiers were really exhausted from shooting people. They just couldn't do it anymore. So they invented these trucks where the gas goes back into the trunk, and they murdered them that way. And that's how my great-grandparents were murdered. So like I said, it was very difficult. It was a horrible thing to find out. But at the same time, nobody in my family knew for 80 years. It was a very intense moment.
Bonnie, how did you finally uncover that fact after 8 decades?
I mean, it was, just we were both doing so much research, reading every single piece of paper with either of their name on it, and we came upon the trains that they were on and each leg of the train ride. And then we knew what happened when they, were outside of this camp that I never heard of. What was it called?
I can't remember. It's too long ago.
One of the many horrible things I learned about the Holocaust that I can't get out of my head is there were 40,000 camps and ghettos. 40,000.
She thought, when I found that number and I told her, and she's like, no, that's the mistake. It's a typo. I said, no, I checked it. It's real.
And if you look at the Holocaust Museum website, they have the map of all 40,000 places where they tortured Jews.
And back to the good old US of A.
Yeah, exactly.
We have a government that's acquiring real estate and warehouses and big empty buildings to disappear our neighbors for no apparent reason and with zero accountability. So it's that playbook at work again. And I think it's horrifying to think that this could happen. In fact, I was out for a walk in the village a couple weeks ago, and a woman I didn't know stopped me. We were by the pond, and she saw a truck that had ice written on the side of it.
Was it an ice truck?
And she wasn't sure, or was it ice? Exactly. And she stopped me to talk because she was so traumatized by the word ice. This is where we are, that an elderly woman can't walk around Heritage Village without having a panic attack when she sees the word ice on the side of a vehicle. It's quite real.
Yeah, I just want to jump in really quickly. I just got in from Michigan last night at 10 o'clock last night, slept and then got in the car and came here. And I was meeting with and interviewing migrant farm workers there, and they're in camps. they're called camps. And they can't leave them because if they do, they will be
Arrested.
and taken away. And they're living in fear. Their families are in Mexico. They can't go out. It just struck me, oh my God, this is what I'm talking about tomorrow. You know, it was really, the juxtaposition was too much for me. You know, it was
Yeah.
horrifying.
Well,
It's all right.
I'm gone.
We know who you are.
I mean, when Bernie said, you know, and it's happening again and again, and it's not just here, it's around the world, that I grew up with never again. And now, you know, it's pogo all over again. We have met the enemy and it's us. You know, there's a lot of kindness out there. There's a lot of goodness, but there seems to be a very fine line between goodness and evil. Many of us are aware of the writing of Hannah Arendt. And I think if you haven't seen the new movie Nuremberg, that was an earlier recognition of what it takes to be evil. And the psychiatrist's conclusion is they're not that different. I grew up believing Nazis were really bad people, very different. You know, I had friends who would never buy a Volkswagen. Why? Well, being made by Germans. But there's not that much difference. And that's, again, to me, goes back to why we have to keep talking about morality and decision-making. But again, as Sandy pointed out, and Bonnie pointed out, in 2016, this country made a very deliberate decision, a democratic decision. And we put somebody in the White House who was known to basically associate with and brought people into the White House who we would say today were known Nazi sympathizers. How did that happen? How did that happen? So I spent a lot of my youth wondering, how did it happen to the German people? And now I'm finding out, and I find it frightening.
Well, irony of ironies. So my mom was born in Germany. My grandparents survived. Nobody else, for the most part, survived. And I just got my German citizenship.
Just in case you have to leave.
Because it looks better over there now. And it's an EU passport. But Germany is acknowledging everything. America is not. But it was still, it's really unnerving having a German passport, I have to say. I can't quite reconcile it all yet.
So I think with Deb's book and with Bonnie and Helene's, the genius of it and the notion of the American way is you have these deeply flawed characters doing some really amazing things to help people and not wanting to be publicly recognized for the initiative. For somewhat selfish reasons, Donenfeld didn't want the whole world.
I was just going to say, that was to his advantage, actually.
But the genius of the book is these are ordinary people with character flaws, big mistakes, reasons to maybe not show up at the family reunion, that kind of stuff. And what can you just speak to what is it like to recreate those characters in narrative, give them their place as people who can do good things? Because as we're seeing evil find its foothold again and not afraid to come out in broad daylight. What are the things that you saw in those characters as they were developing on the page for you that gave you some sense of heart that even people who you don't think can come around and do the right thing actually turned around and saved some very good people?
You can take
Yeah. Well, she's talking about Harry Donenfeld, who was the guy who published Superman. He had been a publisher of girly magazines, you know, not exactly naked girls, but almost naked. This was like in the 20s. He was also
drawings of naked girls.
And then he was also a bootlegger. So he did all kinds of stuff he wasn't supposed to be doing, you know, in the 20s. And then the 30s rolled around and he got into comic books. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's the fascinating thing. He's the most fascinating guy in the book, as far as I'm concerned. He's deeply flawed, but he's the hero of the
The
day.
wife, the mistress, and the lover.
He had he had a wife, a mistress, and a lover. So.
But his grandson told us that.
Right. So we interviewed his family members. He's long dead, but we interviewed his family members. We did as much research as we could, and this person came out. We saw, oh, this is the guy. And it's so. Do you just hold back that bad stuff and just make him a hero? No, because he's much more interesting. With the girly magazines and the bootlegging and the girlfriend and the wife and everybody else. And so I think that gives it such depth, and he is such a character. And, you're rooting for him throughout. You're rooting for her grandfather, who was more a typical hero, I think, and yeah, it just makes it so much more enjoyable, really, in a way. And it's real. That's the real story. Sorry, that's yours.
Yeah, no, I'm done too. Rabbi Eric, as we're on the topic of finding that redeemable thing, or who was the character, the aunt, right, who dressed up and went across town, but brought the son with her as a bodyguard to make sure that he didn't get inappropriate with her while she was looking to get
she was flirting with him
to get the support she needed to bring Jules over, right? What is your experience of finding the goodness in people? Can you give us some pearls of wisdom on how do we find it and nurture it in others, even if we feel challenged by them because maybe it's not too apparent? How do we do your job?
How do I do it? An interesting question, which we had in Torah study, I think it was like 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago. Adam, I think you were there, which was, so give us a great hero in the Torah who we can just look up to, just does everything right. Is there anybody like that? Like in the Torah or in the Bible, or who really just is that stellar, perfect model? And we thought, and the answer was that person doesn't exist. And so whether it's in sacred literature or it's in secular literature, that's not who we are. And that's not who we represent. Everybody is flawed. Look, from a Jewish vantage, and this will feel very comfortable for Christians at this time of the year, that repentance or reflection is part and parcel of, as we see it, the human experience. And so that these flawed people can do great things is no surprise. We tend to like to pillory on people when we see that they have done things wrong. If only we were a little bit more modest about that, to see the potential to do some things right.
Thank you. I would just want to go back to something you said, Bonnie, about how your family lived on the page as you were doing this work, and it was comforting. It took me back to your oratorio, Bernie, and the piece called Trains. And the Polish Jews ask, where will we go? To the ghetto. So many of us to the ghetto. Well, that song, you list the names of the worst Nazi perpetrators. And the Jews become nameless and anonymous in the process while their killers live in history. And later in the wedding, Joshua tells Rachel there's no shame in changing a name as he encourages her to take the fake passport and flee. I'm wondering what it was like for you to write that. And I'm thinking about that as the struggle to humanize and to bring life to where it deserves to be, to highlight the challenges. And I think there's a level of pragmatism that people who need to survive have to face, and the emotional challenge and damage that can do. You know what you need to do and what you're called to do, and that tension in people. Can you just speak to what it was like to address that in the oratorio?
In the middle of the piece is when
Oh, sorry,
after-
Bernie.
It's on.
he asked her. Josh was a flutist who plays in the Jewish orchestras that they had to. So when the trains came in from all over Europe, they would convince them that it was okay. So they have these classical musicians, brilliant musicians that they kept alive just to play. So he has some connections. So the trains have begun in the piece. It's called The Action. It's a long section, and you hear the names of the Nazi perpetrators, like the wheels of the train going round and round. And on top of that, you hear the chorus going, where will we go? To the ghetto, to the train. So they don't know what's going on. They have no clue, but they're gathered from all over Europe to get killed, to get murdered. And then the names of the concentration camps, Majdanek, Auschwitz, Dachau, are whispered in the background, and this train goes on and on. At the very end, after all this stuff, you hear a glistening of the strings, like discordant, and that represents the ashes that are going up on the crematorium. So, I don't know how you deal with that on any level, anywhere, but that was the truth. That was the truth. In the beginning of the piece, however, in the first version, in the next version, but not in the middle version that was taped in Minnesota, in doing my research and in just studying the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, and I came across hundreds of names of heroic Jews that fought in the ghetto, that were part of the resistance, men, women, and I kept on a list of those names, hundreds of names. And in the piece now, in the beginning, all those names are said by different members of the chorus as the piece opens up to honor who they were and the lives. And then the final notion of that is, and the overriding notion, besides never again, and that you got to see the signs, don't be blind, see the signs, is the idea that it's the idea that imagine if the Holocaust didn't happen, what would the world have? Imagine the scientists, the musicians, the scholars, all of those possibilities, all the should have beens. So the next of the last piece, the next of the last piece in the oratorio it's called the Shoah of the should have been. The Shoah of the should have been, because it's the potential that's destroyed by hate. It's the potential for all that could be, should be, ought to be. And there's some messages that say, "Where were you, God?" too. And in the Shoah, as it builds in the Shoah that should have been, one of the lines is, "If God is dead, what remains?"
Thanks, Bernie. Could you just say a little bit more about the oratorio? You touched on it a little bit yesterday at Sarah Cook Hall, but what it was like for you, and the Lapsed Methodist is speaking now, right? And you, in working with Roger Ames, who was not Jewish, could you just speak to that creative process and how he engaged you and sort of the integrity of the project and that interaction?
Well, I think the piece speaks for itself, and I don't want to talk too much. I read your book; it was unbelievable for all the reasons that you said.
We couldn't come, but yeah.
And the work that you've done, Ed, is remarkable, and so and Rabbi, I'm well aware of all the work you've done in your community is unbelievable. That's what it's really about. As far as the process of writing this, I Roger was commissioned. He's a brilliant composer, a brilliant arranger, and has a bone marrow deep integrity to every artistic endeavor. He has to do things artistically. He can never pretend. It just wasn't in his bones. So I got this commission from Greensboro, from a group in Greensboro, to do an oratorio in celebration of, I think, the 50th anniversary of D-Day in 1996. And they wanted him to do something on the Holocaust. So he studied Jewish liturgical music, and he did research, and he started to try to write, and he couldn't do it because he felt that he didn't have it in his blood. He couldn't, how could you take a subject like that and not be authentic, not feel authentic? So he came to me, knowing that my father was in the Polish army, and I had a long history in terms of that. And I had played music with Roger and written some stuff with him. He did all kinds of incredible things, but that's another story. And I said, okay, Roger, as I've already told you, after he wrote that first piece, I said, okay, I'll do it, but we have to make one agreement. And he goes, what's that? I said, we have to be absolutely, without shame, absolutely honest. That's the one thing that this kind of work requires. No soft pedaling, no pretty Jewish music over college, it has to be the real deal, or I won't do it. Because of course, that's why I'm asking you. So we got at it. So we did the first parts, and I took all this stuff from the German propaganda of the time. I read the German newspapers in the 1930s, and all the stuff that came out of the Nazi, and Goering's propaganda machine about the Jews. And I started forming them into lyrics, using only their language. I made up nothing. I didn't have to. What they said was far worse than anything that I could ever come up with anyway. And he started creating this incredible music that supported that kind of virulent hate and virulent demonization. And I studied the pattern. There's a pattern to all this. You start by sort of gently identifying who the evil people are in your midst, who has the blue eyes or whatever, or who's going to poison our blood, as our president has said, pardon me. And so you start with that, and then slowly you demonize. Then you create laws that actually force them to be exactly what you're demonizing them for, to behave in ways that they have no other choice but to behave in. But that's part, see? And you go on and on and on until you completely separate, ostracize them, put them in the ghetto, and then kill them. The final solution. And that's a pattern that repeats itself. And that was the original pattern of the piece, to start with that. So we sent the first part of it down to Greensboro. Thank God there was a deadline, or you never get Roger to finish anything. And they said, that's great. Said, oh, it's wonderful. Oh, it's so powerful. Could you soften it a little bit?
Yeah.
It's just a little bit too harsh for our audience. And I looked at Roger, no. How do you soften the Holocaust? So we began. I said, if they don't want to do it, they don't want to do it. They paid Roger. I never took any money for this, but Roger was terrible with money. He did much more than I did. He was never good with money. And then someone else picked up on it. Fran Roberts in New York and Long Island, and Masterworks, of course, and we developed it from there. And Roger was the best collaborator ever. He was a Zen master of collaboration. He had done a lot of work for the Bernstein Foundation. He had worked with kids and all over the country doing, having them create their own operas. If anyone knew how to work with anybody else creatively, it was Roger Ames. He had lots of partners, done lots of musicals. He was quite amazing with that, and so incredibly easy to work with. We had an argument about it, about anything. We would discuss, look at the next thing and look at the next thing, and it kind of formed. And it really has just recently gotten totally finished. I have it now in a place where it really encapsulates our vision, where we started in 1996. What was it, 30 years later? A bit of a time pass. I'm talking too much.
Sandy,
Absolutely. Here you go.
so it might be a good segue for this group to know that Bernie and I, with the assistance of Sandy, we met with the Woodbury Symphony Orchestra about a week ago to see what they thought about this piece of music. We sent them a copy ahead of time, and they were pretty jazzed about the music and the importance of the piece for now. And so we are committed to moving forward. This is the very, if you will, the first step to move forward to see if we can get this performed the way Bernie has just described, the third version, if you will, here locally or regionally. And so please sign up if you want to be kept informed about this journey that we've just started on. And we've got lots of high hopes, but a lot of work to do. If I could just say one other thing, because what I latched onto what you said, Bernie, was about looking for the signs. How do you know when evil is coming? Because there's a lot of ways people can dress it up, and it's something Eric and I talked about a lot at the beginning. Well, what's different about what Southbury did to communities in the South who said, well, we don't want blacks living here. If we could say we don't want the German American Bund to have a camp here, what else can you exclude and say, well, that's just? Well, just because of the way we see things? Well, you can use that argument the other way. So a couple of weeks ago, my wife and I were in Chile. And Chile went through a very tough period of time of about 10 years, which when you think about it, is almost longer than what Hitler's presence as a real force of evil was in Europe. And they now have a museum called Museum of Memory and Human Rights. And you walk through the exhibits and you see the thousands of people who were either exiled, murdered, or just disappeared, and nobody knows what happened to them. And at the end, there is I don't know what to call it, but a big poster that has this question in Spanish, but I'll say it in English, is, can you have a democracy without truth and justice? And when you have somebody who doesn't care about the truth, that's a sign. When you see somebody who doesn't care about treating all people justly across the board, that's another sign. But we got to keep reminding ourselves to look for these signs.
They're easy to find.
Hmm?
They're easy to find nowadays.
Did you want to?
Well, I just want to say something real quick. Just jumping off of that, I mean, the name of our book is The American Way, and it's from truth, justice.
In the American Way.
And so that's what Superman was supposed to represent.
Leaping over tall buildings in a
Yeah,
single
in a single
bound.
bound.
And Helene, the comic book artists who got gypped out of their royalties,
all
totally understood what they were writing about, right? They
Oh,
were
yeah.
really the true believers in those things.
Yeah, there were two Jewish kids, they saw what was happening in Europe. This was before World War II started for us, it was already happening in Poland, but, yeah, they were totally aware of it, and the whole comic book industry was aware of it, because all Jewish guys in the comic book industry, because they couldn't get into the regular publishing industry, they weren't allowed. So that's why they started it. Same thing with Hollywood.
So I just want to pick up on that thread about collaboration. You and Roger didn't have the Jewish heritage to bring that insight, and that was what you brought to it, and the collaboration that you guys shared. Little did you know.
I had a feeling, but when we would go to readings, they always thought I was Jewish and she was the shiksa. I had the dark hair, the curly hair, blonde.
I would like to turn to Rabbi Eric and just pose the question: what kinds of community collaborations and conversations can we promote as collaborators within our society to promote these kinds of conversations and opportunities for discovery and self-discovery?
What a beautiful first start today here. I think that we've been talking about specifically anti-Semitism as a form of hatred. Anti-Semitism has some unique qualities to it, but here I think is the bottom line: is that one of the best definitions around anti-Semitism was this dislike of the unlike. You dislike what is different from you. And Bernie had mentioned, thousands of years of history. Jews have thousands of years of history of being different and wanting to be different. And that's the rub, and that's the challenge, is that people at times prefer conformity to accepting differences. And so some of the work which we do here in Southbury, and which I do with some of my colleagues, Three Amigos as an example, is precisely on that issue of how do you counter dislike of the unlike? Well, you have to understand people, and you have to appreciate differences, so that when we take a topic and we look at how Judaism sees it, and how Christianity through the lens of Roman Catholicism sees it, and how Islam sees it, and we see the parallels there, and we start to appreciate where the parallels are, and also we appreciate, and this is the unlike, we appreciate where we're different, and we hold up where we're different as something positive. That's where we need to go, and in so much, and as we were talking about sort of how we're seeing contemporary patterns and manifestations, the issue is, how do we accept people who are different than us, and the importance of accepting people and ideas different than us. So.
Thanks, Rabbi. And I just was thinking, Deb, about your book and that sort of that pre-Nazi Vienna, where Christmas was a time of pretty lights and pretty paper, and not a cultural marker that demarcated difference, and that your ancestors were buying Christmas presents, and it was. Could you just kind of speak to the and also when your mom remarried and the spaghetti sauce came into the house? Could you could you just speak to those kinds of experiences as normal and aspects of your life?
Well, my family was really in Vienna. They were assimilated, and they really I never understood why we always celebrated Christmas, and Hanukkah was mentioned, and whatever. Well, I never understood that. My mother said, well, back in Europe, everybody Christmas was really a cultural holiday, not just a religious holiday. So I always grew up with that. But both my parents are 100% Ashkenazi Jew. And I did go to temple until they divorced when I was 7. After that, we couldn't afford synagogue anymore. And then my mom very quickly married a Roman Catholic Italian guy. So I feel more, I'd say I'm Italian by osmosis. But it was a very interesting experience writing the book about my Jewish heritage that I really didn't embrace since the age of 7. It was guilt, it was uncomfortable, I think. And I guilt a little bit, like I felt guilty, like I kind of turned my back on something. And I tried in high school to, but we were Reformed. So I tried the teenage Reform temple, and I just did not fit in at all. They were very different than me. And they had money. I didn't have money, not to stereotype, but just happened to be that way in Hamden, where I grew up. And so where was I going with this?
Anyway, just the assimilation idea.
Yeah, it was really hard for me to write it, thinking like, I kind of felt like I missed something, for decades. Like, maybe I should go. So I read some books on, coming back to Judaism as an adult and learning a little bit more and trying to fill in some of those holes. But I still don't feel like a religious Jewish person. I feel like a heritage Jewish. I feel like my heritage is there. And that partly why I wanted to write the book. I think one of the other reasons is I married the son of a Methodist minister. It's a whole nother story why he became a minister. I should write a book about that. But anyway, I married the son of a Methodist minister, and our oldest child went to Catholic school. So it was very, I felt like my children might be very confused about their religion. And I wanted them to hear all of these stories. They grew up with my mother, who was Jewish. She was confirmed when they lived in New York. And, the kids always knew that we were Jewish, but in a cultural way. And I wanted them to know the story of what happened to their family, because it's part of their story too.
Jenny, put a plug in for one idea about how to carry this forward.
Yeah,
You
I
go ahead.
gotcha.
Okay.
Before I lose
Yeah,
it, Ed,
you
before
go
I
ahead.
lose it.
You're running.
Well, you know what? I think what you're saying about your family experience and your discovery through writing and the research, and that it isn't, Jewish people aren't one thing. There's a complex range of we're human beings, and the labels that we stick on people reduce us to types and not complex human beings. And when we do that, we're robbing all of ourselves the opportunity to really get to know people in a meaningful way. And that's really tragic. It's among the tragedies that come out of this. And that comes through in your book beautifully, the way you honor all that you come from, and how also we are the products of our parents' whims, right? They're very young people when we're little, and they do goofy things, and we forget that everybody's got a big job and so on. But I think your book captures that beautifully, and it's a great reminder that it ain't so simple. Okay, Ed, I got my thought up. They don't stay long.
So one of the things we were working on before COVID for this area to address some of this was something called the Human Library. Something Barbara and I and Christine, we're trying to work with the library and the clergy here in Southbury. And this is out of Denmark. And and you can look up the website, the Human Library. And their motto is learn to unjudge someone. Because we all are built in, we're carefully taught to judge people. And we've got to learn to unjudge. So we're trying to work again with the Southbury Library. We lost some momentum, like everything, lost momentum with COVID. But I encourage everybody to look into what the Human Library is all about. And if we get a little bit more support from the Southbury Library, I hope it's something you'll all participate in. So
Thanks,
think
Ed.
about that.
All right, you could just ask the table, are there any last thoughts before we open up the conversation to the group?
Just one other thought that's on my mind.
He needs his own microphone. He should have his own microphone.
This whole idea of the hero. And what keeps coming up in my mind is it doesn't have to be Superman. Although I call Superman the only legal alien I've ever known. And he did great stuff. But, it's normal people, if you will, or regular people who are called upon at a particular time, and they do stand up. And so we've always got to honor that when it happens. And remember that we all have it within ourselves to do that if and when that situation comes forward. So what I feel is we're all potential heroes, and we've all got to look for those opportunities to stand up when we can.
Sheila read in the paper this morning about, she wanted me to say this, I didn't read it.
Use the microphone.
Actually, it was on my phone.
It was on her phone.
The superintendent in Long Island, school superintendent in Long Island.
Oh, can we give Sheila the mic?
School superintendent in Long Island was very upset when ICE came and took away his senior high school student right before graduation. So he went to Texas, where they put up a lot of these
Camps.
camps. Okay. And they wouldn't give him access to the student. But then the student got, I think it was Guatemala, sent to Guatemala, if I'm not mistaken. And he went down and he brought the student his diploma and a school
Wow.
record, all on his own expense. He did this.
Yep.
It's in there, I'm sure you can Google it today. It's in today's, on my phone today. The other thing is, our book club is reading William Styron's
Sophie's Choice.
Oh, okay. So I'm almost at the end, and get to the end, and he says, oh, when they take her child away, she's telling the story of how they take the child away. So where was God? I don't believe in God. Where was God? And then I don't remember who says it. Where were the human beings? Never mind where was God. Where were the human beings? Which really,
That's us.
that's kind of.
That's us.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Okay, I got to get instructions from Ed on how the protocol for taking the calls from the comments and questions from the audience, so that the live stream folks can hear it, and then we're ready. Tell me what to do, Ed.
I think just have them ask and just repeat.
Repeat it. Just repeat the question. Okay.
I'm going to preface my question. My ex-wife is Jewish and my 3 children were all raised Jews. And the Holocaust is not just Jews.
Right.
It's Russians and Polish, millions.
Gypsies.
And so I'd like to know, how do you distinguish in your work, because we're talking about how you talk about the Holocaust in art, how do you distinguish them from the Holocaust? And how do you, compounding it, all of you presume that we know what you're talking about. And so, like, there are inconsistencies with the present Trump administration, the support of Israel.
Right.
And so how do you juggle that? Thank you.
I'll start.
Okay.
I'm not going there.
No problem.
Rant.
You have to take your.
Two-part question. Each part super hard. The first part is that the Holocaust was all-encompassing and for Jews, but the Holocaust also affected millions of non-Jews who also perished in the Nazi factory of death. So how do we express that? How do we do that? And then the second question is that the president has as it were, within the Jewish community, there's a mix of opinions on what the president does, and I'll just take it one step further and say support for the war currently in Israel is 93% of.
To better state my question,
Oh.
the present administration is synonymous with Nazi, and Nazi is synonymous with anti-Semitism, but it doesn't quite jive with the current administration's support of Israel.
Right. So let me I'll try to take two parts, but there are much wiser people around the table. You can see I'm the least wise because I put up my hand first.
Take it.
We trust you. We trust you. It's all yours.
So I think that Elie Wiesel, who framed the issue this way on non-Jews in the Holocaust, which was that not only Jews were victims, but all Jews were victims. And so and part of the emphasis of the Holocaust, beginning to end, was the annihilation of Jewry. And we see that, if you go back all the way through. We've talked about patterns. I would say one other thing on that before, and then I'll try the second question. When historians have shown that when Hitler was trying out his early speeches in the beer hall, he talked about other things besides Jewry. But the thing which got the most applause was the attacks on Jewry. And he said, hey, this is really good. I can really utilize this.
You got more likes.
He got, well, I would ask you, look how Candace Owens, Tucker Carlson, and the like have been able to very specifically utilize anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism and conspiracy, again, highlighting Jews as a way to absolutely increase their likes. So, so we see such patterns. I think that in terms of parallels, if we try to do from one subject to another subject, contemporary America to the move where Germany went from the Weimar Republic to the Third Reich. If we try to have everything correlate perfectly, it's not going to work. And that's also not really useful history, as I would see it. So we should see areas where the pattern works, an area where the pattern doesn't work. Trump's support for Israel is something. Well, I should say, Trump's support for Israel has been such where it has become personalized around his decision making. And this has been something which started in 2015, 2016, and obviously continues now, which is that he's the one who wants to define what Israel is and what an Israel he'll support. So notice within that supporting Israel, but if you're the president of Israel, you probably don't like the attacks which he's doing over the fact that they haven't pardoned Benjamin Netanyahu, who is on trial for various crimes, right? So, so that support for Israel is itself a complicated thing. That said, some of the policies which the president has done has been things that many fellow supporters of Israel would see positively. The destruction of the Iranian nuclear site, to the extent it was destroyed this past summer, we would see positively. Many of us would. And so I think that there is a confusing tension based upon those subjects. And I think that that confusing tension is natural. And what that does is then we have to look what areas do we agree and what areas do we disagree, and what becomes our priorities within that.
Well, anybody else jumping in?
No.
I wanted to make
Go
a comment.
ahead. Go ahead, Bernie.
I have political opinions and personal opinions about the areas that you say, which are very complicated and fraught with all kinds of emotion and tension. And I'm not going to comment on any of that. But what I will say is when you tell a story artistically, whether you write a book or you create an oratorio, you're creating specific people, a specific story about very specific people, and that resonate as they will resonate for all people. So while you might not be telling about the gypsies in your particular, or you might just be telling a story about what happened to the gypsies during the Holocaust. But in order for it to work as a work of art, it has to be specific, and take from that what you will. And the rest of it is way above my head.
Above my pay grade.
All righty.
I have a question for the authors, Deb, Helene, and Bonnie. There were women in your books. I've read Deb's book. I haven't read Helene and Bonnie's yet, but you mentioned a woman who had to cross town to get a man to do what she wanted. And Deb, I know Doris is a main character in your book. Could you both talk about the damage that happens to a woman's life because of the Holocaust and the people around her, and how she had to carry a lot of the family's burden to get the family through this, and what you wrote in your books?
You go first. I'll start with that. Well, it's interesting that you asked that question, because originally this story was going to end when I got the reparations for my mom, and my grandmother dies, and everybody else is fine. And the more I worked on it, and I had a writing coach working with me, she said, this is not just a Holocaust story. This is the story of your family, a family affected by the Holocaust. And you have to take the whole rest of the story of your mom's life, and you have to put it in the book. And I looked at her and I said, that's 50 more years. But it was so important because, you know, this was not discussed in my family. My mom was an only child, and she said it's Hitler's fault that she was an only child. If it wasn't for him, maybe she would have had one, a sibling. And if it wasn't for him, maybe she would have been a princess, you know, because they had quite a bit of money in Vienna. And we always knew that about my mom, you know, that some of the, like she collected, you know, if she had 10 things, that was good, but 100 was much better. And I always felt it was because of the losses that she experienced, you know, being ripped away at age 6 from her best friend and her family. And then having to come here with, you know, just her mom and her grandmother. Her dad was in Dachau and then Buchenwald. So it was a year before he came. And she had to figure out how to deal with all of this as a 7-year-old. And, you know, my mom was that's one of the things I'm really proud about, I think, in my book, is that her personality really came through. She, all the quirkiness I have is from her. But she's just an example of how crappy things can happen to people. And you have to deal with it. She married my dad when she was 21. She had 3 kids by the age of 24. And then he left her when she had her 4th child. He left her with 4 kids under the age of 6. In 1961, that was not something common. So again, you know, strong woman, all alone. How did she deal with this? She found her way, and she made a wonderful life for all of us. It is something to think about. You don't hear a lot of stories about strong women, and it's important. So I'm glad you brought that up.
I got it. Well, one of my grandmother's favorite sister, who I heard about my whole life, was killed in Paris. And we spent a lot of time, we couldn't go to Paris, unfortunately, because it was COVID, but we spent a lot of time looking through all the documents for her and never found anything, which is still frustrating to this day. I'm still looking.
And she worked in a Jewish orphanage.
She worked at a Jewish orphanage. She got married in Germany and left that day to France. Was captured in France. They were both imprisoned for a little, and then she was shot on the street in front of the orphanage. That's all I know. But the heroine is my Aunt Uschi. That's what we called her. Her name was Ursula, I guess, but we called her Aunt Uschi, which of course sounds like Aunt Tushy. You say it quickly. So she stayed. Her sister, my grandmother, left, but she stayed. She was in Berlin through the whole war. She was what is called a submarine, where you live just under the surface. You're a Jew. And she had, luckily, red curly hair, so she kind of passed, and she attached her star with snaps. So whenever she went on the street, she took it off. Whenever she had to wear it, she put it back on. And she met her husband on the boat coming to America. He had also been a submarine, hiding out for the whole war. They met, they married, but the war she couldn't get past it. I mean, decades and decades later, she had a very, very difficult life, even though she was never in a camp. I mean, she really did survive this amazing thing as a very young woman. She had a typewriter that she took with her from one hiding place to the next and to America. She schlepped a typewriter through that whole situation. She was really incredible. And I knew her. Luckily.
Bonnie, can you just say why the typewriter was significant? Jews weren't allowed to have them.
Jews weren't allowed to have typewriters.
Yeah, that's why. Jews weren't allowed to have typewriters because they weren't allowed to write or do anything intellectual. They thought that would, keep us down. But so it was, I mean, not only was she a Jew hiding in Berlin, but she had a typewriter. It was like crazy that she was so devoted to it.
Thanks. Any other questions out there? Back there.
We've had two concepts brought up. The first being never again, and the second being how do we know when evil is happening again? And in relation to never again, I think, of course, we have to bring that into current time and into the future. So what's happening tomorrow and next week, and next year? And we also have to broaden it to other groups. And so Sandy has already talked about currently warehouses being purchased in this country to house people. So that's tens and tens and tens of thousands of square feet of space for that purpose, which I think is absolutely horrible. And I was also became aware just in the last few months that there is now a congressional caucus, a Sharia-Free America caucus. One of the leaders of this caucus is Chip Roy of Texas, who's currently running for Attorney General in Texas. So if he wins and you're a Muslim person living in Texas, I'm not really sure how things will go for you if you have to interact with the state law enforcement or legal system. The purpose of this caucus apparently comes from a fear that there is a spread of Sharia in American communities and local governments and is going to supplant the Constitution. Currently, I believe there are 50 members of this caucus going across 22 states. Proposed legislation includes the No Sharia Act, which would restrict courts from enforcing judgments or arbitrations that rely on Sharia or foreign legal systems that violate constitutional rights. Preserving a Sharia-Free America Act aims to prevent foreign nationals who adhere to Sharia from entering or remaining in the U.S. And also the Pause Act that proposes freezing immigration until security is improved. I'm not real sure what that really means. And recently, just this week, a headline that said, now this caucus is talking about all Muslims need to leave the country. So again, we talk about never again, and we talk about how do we know when evil is happening.
So what I think you underscored.
I'll leave.
What I think you underscore is this, that the preservation of democracy, the preservation of our standards, as we talk about right and wrong, is that it's important to have community standards and community guidelines and to speak up for them. When we see people being targeted and demonized, to say something. And because the community will only be as good as the common standards which we all uphold. And those standards are under pressure. And part of the way that those standards are under pressure, not the only way by far as we've talked about, is one of the tactics used is the efforts to defame Muslims. A few of us have been involved in community life here in Southbury for a lot of years. I don't think Sharia law has been a real challenge here in Southbury, or I think in many other places.
Or Texas.
Or Texas. Yeah.
Thank you, Rabbi. I think that vigilance and that modeling the kind of behavior we expect is what we can do. And to keep writing and to keep pushing the conversation and to keep voting.
One other point on that?
Yeah.
He takes the microphone, nothing falls. So.
So far. Yeah, no, I think a bright light in Connecticut, actually in the country, has been the opposition to the Department of Education effort called History Rocks. And this is basically part of a plan to basically reimagine our history. And what we're seeing is educators around here in Connecticut are saying, we're not interested. And it's not just Connecticut. So I think we have to applaud when people do stand up. So, that goes back to that. We've got heroes and Board of Educations around our communities here. I think I can say that for Region 15. And so we have to applaud when good things are happening. But at the same time, we can't be too naive, because the power of the federal government is really pretty phenomenal. And we have sort of a relentless group there. And so before I was speaking about the hero, I would just mention another thing, which was an Oscar award that happened last Sunday to a documentary called Mr. Nobody Against Putin. And I think that is showing how somebody who you would say was pretty low on the totem pole in a school in Russia decided he could do something and he could stand up. So if you haven't seen that documentary, I think that's a sign of a little bit of a, hope that people do have the inspiration to stand up to authoritarian governments wherever they may be.
Did everybody? Yeah. And then just on that note, Susan, I think that you bring that up in the same way that Sheila brings up this amazing thing that a school principal did for his student. I think, and we talk about our likes, right? And things that get approved on social media. I think that amplifying the good things that are happening and amplifying our awareness of the things that aren't so good, that require our attention, is what this is all about. And I stop and I think that poetry is at the heart of everything that's happened today. I want to give poetry a plug because Faith and I, both poets laureate of our towns, know each other through poetry. I got to know Ed because he asked me to write a poem to commemorate the 85th anniversary of Southbury Says No. And those poetic conversations emerged. I get to know Helene because she's related to Ed, read this amazing book. I get to know Deb, who's a neighbor. I get to know Bernie through another poet who connected us through music. And I know Rabbi Eric because I live in this amazing community. And I think fostering these conversations, having a gallery owner who will open her space to a conversation like this, showing up for it, making it a community event that's available to the larger world, is us showing up for our democracy. And I want to say thank you to everybody for being here. Thank you very much. I think we still got coffee.